Maybe if it's more interesting, I could just show pictures from the Amsterdam trip and skip this one. Yeah, he was along, so that's not going to happen. After the meetup. Yeah. So normally I like to reference the previous presentation as I start, but I have no idea what Conrad said. So if I say anything that contradicts what he said, let me know, especially if it's funny. And also, ask questions as we go. If you're asking questions that goes long, then I'll go fast at the end. So just interactive is good. So I'm Bob Jones. I lead the testing team at Chatham. So I'm in our Philadelphia office in the U.S. and just visiting Krakow for a couple weeks. Also, this is not my first initial test meetup. I lead a Philadelphia software testing meetup that I founded. So this is the second one. I don't know where I'll go next, but this is a thing. And see, I've been at Chatham for 10 years, and I'm going to, in this presentation, talk about some of the things that have worked for us from a technical testing perspective. How many people here are in, I'll say, more or less formal test roles? Because I know we have a mix of testers and developers. Anyone in test roles? Okay. Oh, perfect. Good to tell you. For the rest of you, I think you'll find things that are interesting, because one of the things that I've been seeing is that the roles have just been blurring more and more, and we'll talk about that. But what I'm going to do tonight is give a little bit of the context of how testing happens at Chatham, just some things about how we do software development, only because it'll help make sense of why we do some of the things that we do. Because if you're in a different shop, we do web apps and services for finance clients. So if you're doing embedded systems, this stuff is going to be different just because of the context. And I'm going to talk about the context, and then some of the technical things that we do that support this technical testing and development, and some of the less technical things that actually support this. So I've been at Chatham for 10 years. I've been in software for longer than that. And I've seen this. I have two things in my hand. I don't know why I put the beer down. I should have held onto that and got rid of this. So I've seen a lot of things happen in the time that I've been in testing. Like when I started, releases were, every couple years for major releases, quarterly updates for hot fixes, and testing was something that was done at the end of a project. Actually, it was often the kind of thing that was condensed because development seemed to take longer, and the delivery deadlines were fixed. So there are all kinds of awful things that happened, and it's been evolving, especially in the groups that I've been involved with, where it's become much more technical, integrated with the dev team, and we're releasing more frequently. So we're delivering on to production 2-week cycles, but a number of you are probably delivering faster than that. Days, weeks are common now. Yeah, I can kind of skip through this. Like the first and the third ones are kind of the interesting thing for what we've done at Chatham. When I started, the testers were really separate. We did our own thing, and now, as I said, everything's integrated. A fun thing, though, is in that sort of BC era, things changed. So when we were doing stuff by ourselves, we were using commercial test tools. Everything was awesome, and then we started to do things that looked more like feature development. And then all of a sudden, we started getting grief that we didn't expect. It was because we were being treated like programmers, and everybody else's code stinks, and just code fights happened, and that was actually kind of I didn't know it at the time, but it was a good sign that we were making progress. Some of these things are kind of terrible. I have a problem with writing really awful notes, and I leave them laying all over the place. But I found this one, and I still kind of like it because I think it represents our testing philosophy pretty well. So our goal is to use the testing function to speed the development of good code. So we're not trying to stop it, not trying to make perfect code, and we're doing it for a tech-heavy approach. So testers program work with their IDE probably as much as feature developers do. At our shop, we do a lot of the shift-left approaches. So we're working up front with early in the sprint to define requirements, writing acceptance tests before code is written, that sort of thing. And then it's agile, so we're doing everything with a lot of collaboration and transparency and those sorts of things. Yeah, I made this, and it was after the Amsterdam trip. I was trying to find some way to represent our work, but I think it's beautiful. Actually, I did it when it was much smaller. When I expanded it, I realized how funny it was. But so we're working in 2-week sprints. Everything is it says delivered at the end of the sprint, and every testers and developers start together at the beginning and end together. This red line kind of represents our automated test suite, which we rely very heavily on. And then there's a burn down chart that, if it was accurate, it wouldn't actually step down like that. It'd probably be more of a dive, but we do our best. And kind of key to this is there is no test phase at the end. The development at the end of the sprint should be happening just as hard as it is at the beginning, because there's nothing that's being blocked from a test perspective. And that's really what we've put our program around to try to support. And the dedicated testers are all, they're all programmers, differing levels. So some are just people who can solve problems with code. Others are, have feature developer level skills. But that's the approach that we take to solve this. Yeah, and so I'm going to share some things that work for us. They might not work for us tomorrow, and they might not work for us on all of the teams. Everything's going to change. So this is just kind of a snapshot. And yeah. So I have a series of things I identified as technical approaches to testing that support us. And I'm going to go through each one of these. But as I said, this is really kind of a conversation. So, ask questions, disagree with me. Conrad, I'm going to probably show something that just, I think my test pyramid has 3 layers. So we might be in for a disagreement right there.
You can.
There's a seat right here. All right, so let's go through each one of these and kind of talk a little bit. So, how much should you automate? Should you automate everything? No. I know that I've talked with a lot of people who set goals for how much they automate. Automate 50% of tests or 70%. We don't really work that way, but we do end up automating a lot of tests. I was just looking at our test run for today across all of our teams before this started, and of the top 2 layers of tests on a 3-layer pyramid, I think we had like 26,500 tests that run. We have some older systems, so there are a lot of legacy tests that are running. We're building more tests faster with our new stuff, but we keep a lot of different frameworks going. And really, rather than like having any kind of set goal, we try to start everything with a discussion, and this works in a couple ways. So we try to just adapt to everything. As we develop features, like a method that's worked well is to write down like what you plan to test, and just like ask these questions of like, do we need to test something every day? Definitely having discussions with the project team helps to eliminate like duplication with unit tests, and making sure we have things built correctly. But having these discussions has gone 2 ways. It's helped both make sure we build the right test, but make sure that we're not missing tests, make sure that the feature developers aren't missing requirements, because the test discussions are kind of critical to that. But yeah, just everything that makes sense, nothing more. The 3-layer test pyramid, because I really don't know what you said about the test pyramid.
I believe that would be pretty much the same.
Okay. We try to keep things like this. Like when I started at Chatham, I think all of our tests were just UI tests, and then we've made a big move towards developing good unit tests, and like now, like that's really baked into everything. Like code can't be committed without good unit tests and unit test coverage. But from a test developer perspective, the thing that's been most interesting over the past few years is really focusing on the API level tests. That's where we've had both the ability to make the fastest tests that cover a lot of ground, but also the ability to write tests that are impactful for the development cycle. So the API level tests, right now we're using, on many teams, things like Cucumber.js to write the API tests. And those discussions happen like really early, and like we're developing APIs before the UI. The testers are involved with the discussions about the contract. So all these things that would really otherwise bubble up much later and be much less impactful, we're getting early, and so the test can run very quickly. For those who are testing right now, are you doing API level tests?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. How's that working out? What does that look like? Are they automated? Are you like ad hoc, or how are you doing things?
If about me, it's more
Sure.
ad hoc, yeah. And it's implemented already when UI is ready, and you can test, for example, connection between new Go database and currently using interface. Yes,
All right. Yeah, ad hoc. Thank you. Yeah.
In my project, it's mostly automated.
Is it at the
Integration layer.
okay?
Different services.
Awesome. What does that look like for you? Like how are those tests built?
Actually, I'm working on that project only for 2 months.
Okay.
I came from UI testing mostly, so it's pretty different. But still, if we are looking on this pyramid, let me say, in my project we have more integration tests, I believe, than unit test levels. In my project, most of developers are also involved in writing end-to-end tests, like we call them.
Yes.
And like maybe it could change.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what's happening for us. Like where traditionally the software testers have worked in those top 2 layers, but as we've been integrating things with actually after we moved through that point where the code fights and then start working together, a lot of it gets shared quite a bit. It's kind of funny, like in some ways, like you want to own the test because like this is like your domain and you want to keep it, but everything gets much stronger when you share it and you learn a lot from everybody, and it just challenges a lot of assumptions. But yeah, the automated, like the daily API tests, I think that's where you get your biggest advantage, though, because you can run hundreds of tests in minutes, and the developers can use the tests. So I think that's again a change from one of those earlier stages where the tests early on for us were just to confirm regression failures, and they were definitely at the end. And now our tests are part of the development cycle. So in addition to unit tests that definitely the feature developers write, these tests are part of the that pre-commit package. So everybody kind of working together, like these tests are run to make sure that developer built the right thing. We've gone through different frameworks for it. I think the one that I've been working on most recently, which is using like a Cucumber.js and JavaScript of all things. But at APIs, you can just call things back and forth, and you don't need any fancy languages. But that's where we've gotten, I think, the biggest impact. So acceptance tests versus regression tests. I don't know if anybody else makes this distinction like I do, but the acceptance tests are things that are, the automated tests that are really helping us figure out what we are going to build, and then regression tests are the things that have been living or things you might build after the fact. We spent years focusing on regression tests, and they were just really hard to build quickly. By moving to acceptance tests, like we're writing tests kind of at the ticket layer, so things that I think you would just never think to write if you were writing them after the fact become more viable. So you might have something you might have a ticket on a sort order or something, and that's an easy test to write. You can get there very quickly. But if you were writing a big regression suite after code is done, there's just like too many things that you'd probably avoid narrow tests like this and try to just get the complex tests. I can't help but think of one of the guys at work. So he's not here. He's in the Philadelphia area, so I can make fun of him a little bit. He's a great tester and kind of a terrible coder. And when we try to, but I mean that with love, so it's fine. When we tried to move in to get him to write acceptance tests, all he would do is write these really complex tests, and they would take, for him, weeks to write. And when you're working in a 2-week sprint and you're trying to build tests like every day so that you can support the development process, that never worked. I think he stopped trying. So that's good for the development team, maybe bad from a test perspective. The other thing that was interesting on this is that the acceptance tests I thought would be harder because we're writing tests for code that hasn't been written yet. So if you're working in the UI, you don't have all the elements. If you're working on a service, you don't have the service, the endpoint built. You might have a contract, and that's great. If you have the service contract, you can do quite a bit. Or for the UI, if you have a good drawing, maybe it could be a good bar napkin rendering of an application, you can get pretty far. And if you're working closely with your team, you can either just have the developers have a kind of standard set of element identifiers that you use all the time, or you can tell them what to do, or you can suggest something, or even in some of our current workflows, like we just add it on the test side. Pre-commit tests versus regression. Where are you guys at on that? Is that something that you develop code before the application's done?
It depends. It depends on the project. For example, we have a current project which is already finished, and you have this with the interface, and it's easy for you to write, let's say, regression test and acceptance test. But if your project is only in stage of development and you still don't have current interface and even don't know how it will look like, it's really difficult to write acceptance test in advance, because we are talking about agile. When every day you get new tasks and everything is changing so rapidly, so it's really difficult to even create small smoke test docs for interface. If we're talking about full test plan with full and ready acceptance tests.
Yeah, this is one of the things that's interesting because so first off, you're talking about agile and just acceptance tests. So we're I've found that when you're talking with different people, you use the same words, but then the shop can be very different. So yeah, that's different from me. We were saying the same kind of thing. Anyone else is it a similar situation? It's just kind of because it's very very rapid and you don't have access to things, or
actually we are building the tests in the same time where developers building their code. So. But for us it's easier, I think, because our testing code is not separated from the repository where the application code is, and so every time it's updated, and we are changing rapidly with developers as well. So
yeah, that's a good point. I kind of have that reference in some later slides. So in some ways, you have an advantage. You've been there a couple months, and I've been on this long ride for for a decade, and we have all these. You kind of drag a lot of your baggage along with you, and if you start a shop where you don't have that, then you have a clear advantage. Anything else from different ways of working? For those who are future developers, do these complaints make sense of how it can be? Do you have empathy? No.
No empathy.
Yeah, so this is probably going to be very similar to what you're saying in your shop. And again, we went through this migration of where on the test team at Chatham, we started with being, I say, non-technical or just like, mixed kind of technical skills to using some commercial test tools that used, VB script as the language. Anybody a proud VB script writer? Nope. And when we moved from that, like, there was not a good open source community for testing like there is now in languages like C#, which are, kind of our core languages. So we went with Ruby. And any Ruby fans? Come on. Yes.
I don't.
This was the language that our test team used to kind of make the jump into better technical skills, and it was kind of fun. There's a book called, I think it was, this was from 2007, I think. It was called Ruby for Testers and Other Teams, so something to that effect. And the main purpose of that book was to give people enough information so that they could use Ruby to solve simple problems that you might encounter during testing. It wasn't focused on building automated test frameworks or building web apps. It was just, I need to compare directories every time every time I run a process, I need to compare two directories. So, how can I quickly write a script that gets us to that? And that was the route that we took at Chatham to bring the test team up, is like with that. And it was only almost an accident that we started using Ruby heavily for like UI testing and for different kinds of frameworks. But it's a delightful language, and as we've evolved through this, because trying to work more closely with the rest of the development team, we don't use Ruby in any production stack. So as we've moved through, Ruby's kind of just like this love that you remember in your past, and now we're working more with like C# and JavaScript. Fortunately, JavaScript is coming along a little bit. It's almost a programming language now. Thank you. And another thing that happened with us is our test code, especially when it was Ruby, we kept it in our own stacks. We built some test frameworks for service testing that was a web app written in Ruby. We tried with Ruby, just didn't take here. But those were all separate, and like they gave us a lot of advantages. But now we've migrated to where our best cases now have the test code and the feature code living together. It's caused a lot of good discussions, like with our Git workflow. I haven't seen any real downside to it now, except we have had to drop some tools that were maybe still viable. I'm thinking of Cham, but they don't work quite as well in this. Anything else from your experiences that you think would have made on this list? You didn't know that you were going to be part of the presentation. All right. So Git, I mean, if you're in especially a shop now that's not very old, there's probably nothing other than Git that you've used there. We've moved from Subversion and having this kind of an older commit structure, and like to see is from a tester, I would describe our old structure as commit a lot of code that you throw against the wall, and then we would test it later and try to pull the bugs out of it. And that's a little extreme, but with our old Subversion system, it was really difficult to do good progressive testing, and which we did do good progressive testing. Don't get me wrong, but over the past year, we've been migrating from that structure to Git, and we really made sure that have been trying to make sure that it wasn't just a different different repository and do the same things, because with Git we're able to really make sure that everything happens together. So the testing and the features happen together on feature branches. We've been experimenting with different branching strategies so that we can kind of work asynchronously between test and feature dev and bring it together. I think a great thing is that if I get a feature branch from a developer and I find a small bug in it, depending on where my comfort is anyway, I can just fix it in that branch. I don't have to open a ticket and go back through some other cycle. So there's more blending that happens there of the roles. And yeah, so code review notes instead of tickets. Like a lot of things are just like more intuitive and work well with the cycle. The other, like this final item one here was like the tester merges the feature branch. We don't always do that, but that's a kind of a big culture change for us, and it's been really interesting when it works, because we still have a lot of, let me put it into master, deploy it into our test environments and see what happens. But when we test it locally, so now the testers, again, are more technical, being able to have the whole stack locally on their machine to run tests and to do maybe some high level exploratory testing, and then run automated tests or complete automated tests. We can do that on the feature branch. I suppose there's also at this level, in addition to fixing small bugs, we can also fix some small testability issues. So if there aren't good identifiers, we can add that in and that sort of thing. So is this resonating, or using Git and do this kind of thing, or things different?
Do you keep tests and application code in the same repo?
Yes.
And when you want to put some only tests on production, you have to put on production whole application.
Like I can commit a test, like I can just write test code and commit it to master. Yeah, I mean that stuff. Actually, I'm not sure what happens to it. I guess it gets deployed.
Actually, you may have a profile separately that will build only your test, I think, for production, and will not use as a code for application. So.
Yeah, the test code is definitely not going to compile and be like a binary that gets sent. But I don't know what happens to it. Steve?
It's not going to get shipped.
Yeah. It's not going to get...
We came with actually different solution. You said that you make branch, test it, and then merge to the main repository for branch. And we came with idea that we do all the stuff on the master branch, and weekly we create another branch, like release stable.
Mm-hmm.
Then we test it and release it, or do the fixes on this branch, and do this weekly. So the master is like all the stuff doing. And weekly there is branch, not for the stabilization, ready to release. Different approach.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. In a way, that was similar to our previous approach, but we were doing we weren't doing it in Git, but we were committing everything to our test environment every night for testing. Our biggest thing has been now to prevent bugs from being pushed to the test environment by testing them locally. And we've found a lot of different ways to use Git, and I was hoping that one great way would evolve, especially from a branching strategy, and it really hasn't, because it depends on the work that's happening. So whether we commit tests directly to Git or to master, and then have those tests fail before the other feature branch gets merged in, or whether we just work in local feature branches or do some combination of things. I don't think we will find a good one solution, at least in today anyway. It'll change tomorrow. But this was, I think, the biggest thing for this year that we did that is improving our test quality. Go this way. So run your tests a lot. So don't write all the tests, but when you do have tests, use them. And so we have 26,000 tests, but then they run at least every night. Some tests are running on every commit. Let's see. Test crash, normal.
We do retrigger. Maybe they will fix.
What'd you say?
We do retrigger.
Yeah. We have discussions about that. Some people hate that. not the people who have to own the tests. But and this last thing here, like it's kind of a false statement. Somebody pointed out after I wrote it, but the more you run your tests, like the more reliable they become. There's a missing part in that. The more you run the tests and care about the results, then the better they'll become. And this was something that we spent a lot of time from a technical test or an SDET kind of like software developer engineer and test role to solve things, where we started writing applications to help us manage the test results, because we had results come from somewhere in an HTML file over here, somewhere in like our build system over here, and we had to just running all these tests and trying to manage the results and get some analysis workflow. Keep track of yep, this failed because of a ticket I know about versus this is something that I don't know and need to spend time on. These were things where we spent a lot of time like just building out tools, which comes into make your own tools. So this has been something that's successful for us. Learning to leverage simple frameworks like Sinatra and Flask it's been something that's worked well for our test team. It's been great for a couple of reasons. One is we've learned the stack. So now words that the feature devs would talk about that we didn't understand, now it's like, oh, when you say that, it's just like this thing I'm doing here. So that's kind of cool. But with Sinatra, which is a micro framework for Ruby, and Flask, which is a very similar one for Python, you can build a web app and have it stand up with like 5 lines of code. And once you learn how to use a couple of routes and put some simple HTML on the page, if you you can build a tool to do. I'm trying to think the last time I actually stood up a web app to do something. I believe it was a case where I was comparing things where I only had access to the internal reference numbers, but I wanted to compare the results, something like that. So it was just a simple call to the stuff you would do manually, right? Of like making an API call to get stuff and then viewing it. It was actually simple enough with these frameworks just to build an app, and then I could share this tool with other people. And because we're in different offices, I could actually build a tool in Philadelphia, and then folks here could use it. And we had a lot of things evolve that way. If you solve a problem using terrible code, you've still solved a problem. So I get grief on my terrible code sometimes, but it solves problems. So I'm kind of happy with it, and it just helps grow the skills. Yeah, this is sort of similar to the last one. Embrace everything that's terrible about the role. So anything that has like a lot of repetition or boring stuff I've found to be great targets to throw some technical skills at, and that can range from a bash script to a web app, or even figuring out how to properly use the developer tools in your Chrome console, where you can plug some code into that. So we have a lot of different technical approaches at work, but then the non-technical things, sometimes I think they're actually more effective. And this first one is just for those who are in the test role especially, but to assert yourself as a full member of the dev team. Too often I've seen people in test roles just kind of accept what's given. So if everybody else, because there's more developers on a team than there are testers, so if they're going down some path, it's like, well, we'll just follow that and try to accommodate. And by asserting yourself and like asking for things that are reasonable, it can really make your life a lot easier. So it could be things as simple as looking at the work that's ahead and asking for the work order to change. So if you're doing a series of service calls and you're doing something new, having somebody developing the get endpoint might be completely useless to you and non-testable because there's nothing entered. So you might need a post endpoint first. So that might be an easier order of events to have something that creates before you have something that reads the data. And I've seen this a lot with we could probably, those who've been working for a while could probably think of a lot of examples where the order can make a big difference. Sometimes things that just are an arbitrary decision can just idle you for a week while you're waiting for the rest of stuff to happen. So asking for that is useful. mentioned this already, but become part of the merge process or code reviews. Even if you're not understanding everything that you're reading, just being involved in that is useful. Asking people to do things. So if you're trying to work on that dev test cycle where you need to kind of keep everything going, if the testing is slowing down and then the feature developer's like ready to pick up another ticket and start working, you're just going to get further behind, and then you're not going to have that like that completing together bit at the end of the sprint. For some reason I've seen that it's somehow difficult for people to ask others to, especially in different roles, to stop or to take on some other work and help with this. But it's useful. Of course, asking for testability features, asking a developer to pair tests with you. So all of those things, not technical, but they support a lot of the technical aspects. Anything else that would come under this list? Anything that should come off of it? Asking the developer to pair tests with you? No. So sharing everything and working with folks. I'm kind of focusing on like insecurities that everybody has some insecurities at some level, but I think a number of testers have insecurities with their technical skills. So as they're writing code and their test code, they want to kind of hold on to it because they understand it, and they know that this other person over here is just a much better programmer, and I want to kind of keep this to myself. Give that up. It doesn't help anything. Just you'll learn more, and your test code becomes more important. The key thing in this is as you ask people, like say members of your feature dev team, to help with your code or to help write tests, just accept the fact that they're going to hate it and they're going to change it. But it's not because you're bad or your test code is bad. Everybody else's code is bad. So as soon as you let anybody in, it's going to happen. You just give that your best nervous smile and hope for the best. Yeah, I mean, acceptance criteria, definition of done, specification by example. That could be, that's a whole big topic by itself. But really, just encouraging those discussions early on so that you're not stuck like not knowing what's going to happen, not being able to write a test because you don't know what something's going to look like. Slowing people down to understand the work project before people start working is useful, because I mean, I'm guilty of it too. If I'm going to start a project just like by myself, I might allow myself to be a little bit hacky maybe, and I'll just start coding and I'll figure it out as I go. And like that often works fine. It doesn't work fine, I think, with commercial code, like stuff that you're making a living off of, and people depend on. So kind of asking for a little bit of slowdown for clarification, and that also allows you to write your tests so that you know what it's going to look like. 2 years ago, we made a change of focus. So before that, our focus was entirely on like how do we get better as technical testers. And you can write a lot of automated tests and still have a lot of quality issues. Actually, probably everybody in here write a lot of tests and still have quality issues because you just can't predict everything. So I picked up actually there's a copy of it back there, Elizabeth Hendrickson's book called Explore It, which focuses on obviously exploratory testing, and she presented the model in there that is it's a team-based approach to exploratory testing. So it's time-boxed, session-based, and often done in pairs. It's kind of simple, but it's been really effective for our quality. So what we do with this is, as we get close to the end of a feature being developed, we'll make a decision about whether we need it to do this or not, and then get the whole development team together, exploring in different areas, and according to the charters, which give you some general direction on where to go, but it doesn't tell you what to do. So it's not a test script. It's kind of like test direction, and having the whole dev team work on it. So the people who build it, the people who have been testing it, working in pairs and just kind of documenting as you go, and then having a retro right after it, where we prioritize the work and decide, what we're going to fix or just ignore. But we learned so much information in what is really it's like an hour-long session. So it's a great complement to all the tests that you can predict, through automation. Formalized exploratory testing, is that a thing that you guys are doing? You should. It's really it's kind of fun, especially when like the feature developers are using the application for the first time and they're sitting next to you and like they're looking at it so hard because it's just like a shift of perspective, and it gives you such great confidence in going into a release. So there's a copy of it back underneath that light. If you're not familiar with the book, it's in front of you, Natalia. The Explore It. Yeah. All right, but don't be non-technical all the time. Let's see, I think this is So reducing work in progress. Obviously, if you say yes, people want to help, and you want to do the right thing. But if you say yes to everything, you're never going to be able to do those cool things that you want to do, like to grow your technical skills or to build out some important test or something. So from your own perspective, just say no to things sometimes so you can free your time. But the thing that in the context of reducing work in progress that I have seen to be super effective is the concept of swarming on your agile team. So rather than a dev team working on 6 things simultaneously, which as a tester, that's 6 context shifts that you kind of have to keep track of as you go. So with swarming, everybody works on the most important thing first, and then as that's complete, you kind of roll down to the second one and the third. It works great for product owners because they know that this first goal is going to get complete because the whole team's on it. But as a tester, you're like, yep, I can spend all my attention here. I'm working with the team to get this done. And then you just really focus on done on that before you shift. And that's been an exciting thing. I don't know if it works in every case, but it's been something that I look to do wherever I can now. Is swarming something that you guys are doing? Is it a word that doesn't mean anything in Polish? I don't know. All right. And then this is where I'll end. So focus on the team. So if for the kinds of things that we've been doing at Chatham, if you were trying to do to be this great technical tester, but your team's not on board, you can't do it. Just because their workflow won't match with yours, and the value won't be there. But working with a team, you can share value and just collaborate more. So that's been the team part's been, I think, the most fun part of the technical aspect. We're technical peers, and then just kind of work together and collaborate. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks for indulging some of my dumb jokes, and if you like dumb jokes, I'll be here for a little bit longer, until 6:30 tomorrow. Then I fly back. And thanks for coming to the first kraków.assert.